Emily Harris's beloved 20-year-old oak tree was mercilessly mutilated by her HOA, an act that shattered her sense of safety and respect in her own backyard. At the center of it stood Karen Miller, whose obsessive control over the neighborhood led her to act as judge, jury, and executioner, ignoring laws and common decency. Yet Emily refused to stay silent, rallying evidence, legal support, and community attention that turned the tables on Karen's arrogance. But just wait until you see the shocking twist in this drama and how justice ultimately claimed victory. Emily Harris had always loved mornings in her backyard. The soft golden sunlight of San Diego would spill across the garden, catching the dew on the grass and illuminating the vibrant colors of her flowers. But that morning was different. There was an unusual silence, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Something felt wrong. She slipped on her slippers and stepped outside, still half asleep, expecting the familiar comfort of her yard. The sound of birds, the rustle of leaves, the comforting shade of the towering oak that had been in her family for decades. But instead she froze, her heart skipping a beat. Her massive oak tree, once the proud centerpiece of her garden, had been cut down in a way that seemed almost deliberate. The top portion was gone, leaving jagged branches jutting into the air like broken fingers. Shards of wood and shredded leaves were scattered across the lawn, forming a chaotic pattern that made her chest tighten. Emily blinked, thinking perhaps she was still dreaming. She reached out, touching the rough bark that remained, feeling the raw edges where the tree had been hacked. Memories flooded back, planting that tree with her father 20 years ago, watching it grow alongside her own, life milestones, birthdays celebrated under its branches, summer afternoons spent reading in its shade, family gatherings with laughter echoing around its trunk. The thought that someone could come into her yard and destroy all of that sent a chill straight through her. Then she saw them, the HOA team standing near the edge of her property, clipboard in hand with expressions that seemed too calm for what they had done. And there she was, Karen Miller. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her. The woman with an obsessive eye for detail, someone who had a reputation for policing every blade of grass and every flower bed with an almost personal intensity. Emily felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. How could Karen, of all people, make a decision like this without any warning, any explanation, or even the courtesy of knocking on her door? Her mind raced. She remembered the HOA newsletters, the mild reminders about landscaping rules, the occasional note about maintenance. Never once had there been a mention that her beloved oak was in violation of any regulation. And yet here it was, reduced to splintered remnants, as though the history of her family in this home meant nothing. The injustice of it struck Emily like a physical blow. She felt a strange combination of numbness and sharp panic. Her legs moved automatically, bringing her closer to the mess, as if proximity could somehow reverse what had happened. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and leaves, a scent that usually signaled growth, life, and summer fun, but now carried an edge of violence and loss. She looked around, half expecting a neighbor to appear and explain that this was some kind of terrible mistake. But the street was quiet. The sun glinted off the clean sidewalks and the well-kept lawns, everything else seemingly untouched, which made her tree's destruction feel even more pointed, almost personal. Emily sank onto the edge of the patio, hugging her knees. She couldn't breathe easily. Her mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and sorrow. How could something so deeply rooted in her life, literally and figuratively, be taken away without consent? Her fingers traced the rough stubs of branches, and she imagined the years of growth that had gone into that tree. The way its shade had been a silent witness to her life. Every memory, every moment under its canopy had been violated, and then it hit her. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. The HOA had acted, and Karen Miller had been at the center of it. The realization filled Emily with a sinking sense of violation, a mix of shock and disbelief, so intense that for a moment she couldn't even summon anger. She simply stared, trying to process the scene in front of her, the loss of something she had loved, nurtured, and relied upon for decades. In that quiet morning, under the harsh sunlight that revealed every splinter and jagged edge, Emily Harris understood that her life in this neighborhood had just changed. Her tree wasn't just a piece of nature. It was history, memory, family, and comfort. And it had been taken from her in an instant. Emily's initial shock slowly shifted into a simmering, burning hatred. The moment she discovered Karen Miller's so-called motive, Emily felt as though the floor had been ripped from beneath her. Karen had said without hesitation that the oak tree ruined the view of the street and disrupted the perfect look the HOA wanted to maintain. It was absurd, insulting, and completely heartless. Emily had spent decades caring for that tree, and now someone dared to reduce it to a complaint about appearances. The sheer arrogance made her blood boil. The more Emily thought about it, the angrier she became. The HOA had never issued a single warning. There had been no inspection notices, no polite request to trim branches, no attempt to discuss the matter before taking action. It was as though Karen had acted as judge, jury, and executioner all at once, deciding unilaterally that her personal vision of the neighborhood was more important than the law, property rights, or common decency. Emily replayed the scene in her mind. Karen standing there, clipboard in hand, smiling as if she had done something heroic rather than destructive. Every detail was a reminder of the injustice. Emily tried to reason with her, holding the legal documentation that proved the oak tree was protected under state law. She explained calmly, outlining every regulation and statute, hoping that the evidence would appeal to reason. But Karen merely laughed, a high, dismissive sound that seemed designed to humiliate. She waved her hand, brushing aside legalities as if they were irrelevant. It was the kind of laugh that communicated power, indifference, and superiority all at once. That laugh echoed in Emily's mind, repeating itself like a taunt. Each time she remembered it, her hatred grew. This wasn't just the loss of a tree. It was a personal attack, a challenge to her values and her voice. Karen had crossed every boundary, ignored every rule, and acted with the confidence of someone who believed that authority was a shield against accountability. Emily's hatred wasn't blind. It was fueled by reason, by the injustice, by the deliberate cruelty, disguised as bureaucratic concern for aesthetic standards. She thought about her neighbors, too. How could they stand by and watch? Did no one else see how absurd and unfair this was? Emily's hatred extended beyond Karen alone. It included the system that allowed someone to wield unchecked power over other people's lives, their memories, and their property. She clenched her fists, imagining all the quiet afternoons spent beneath the oak, the laughter, the shade, the stability it had offered, now reduced to splintered branches and unheeded laws. The emotion was hot, consuming, and singular, a desire for accountability. Emily wasn't content with passive grief. The injustice had to be corrected. Every word Karen had said, every dismissive glance, every smirk. It strengthened Emily's resolve. She felt a strange kind of energy rising in her, a drive that transformed her shock and sorrow into something actionable. Hatred, in this case, became fuel. She began to envision the steps she would take, researching precedents, consulting lawyers, documenting everything. Karen had overstepped, but Emily would ensure there were consequences. Her hatred was no longer a passive feeling. It was a spark for strategy, determination, and focus. She could almost feel the tide turning in her mind, from powerless victim to a force capable of demanding justice. By the end of that day, Emily's world had changed. Her heartbreak had evolved into a sharpened edge of resolve, a recognition that what Karen had done was not just unfair, but intolerable. Every laugh and every dismissive remark had cemented a promise in Emily's heart. She would not rest until justice was served, until the law and common decency reclaimed what had been violated. Emily's anger, once a simmering fire, now became a driving force that demanded action. She realized that lamenting the destruction of her oak tree would achieve nothing. She had to respond with precision, evidence, and strategy. Her first step was to hire a lawyer, someone experienced in property and environmental law, to ensure her case was solid. Emily felt a rush of energy as she organized all the materials that proved the tree's protected status under state law. Official permits, municipal regulations, and historical documentation showing that the oak had been preserved for decades. She pored over every detail, making notes, gathering photographs that captured the tree in its full grandeur before Karen's reckless interference. Side-by-side comparisons of the thriving tree and the mangled remnants in her yard told a story more powerful than any argument. This was a living legacy destroyed without warning, permission, or reason. Emily knew that facts alone could speak louder than words, and she meticulously built a case that left no room for dismissal. Armed with proof and legal guidance, Emily demanded a meeting with the HOA. She drafted a formal letter outlining the violations, citing the state law protections, and detailing her intent to pursue legal action if the matter was not addressed. Each sentence in her letter was precise, firm, and unwavering, a mirror of the anger that had transformed into a methodical resolve. Emily felt a strange satisfaction in her clarity. Where once there was helpless fury, now there was purposeful direction. When the day of the meeting arrived, Emily faced Karen with a calm exterior, though beneath her composure surged a storm of controlled fury. Karen, ever confident in her authority, attempted to assert dominance with the same dismissive tone she had used before. She smirked, waved away Emily's concerns, and even tried to intimidate her with hints of bureaucratic consequences and neighborhood gossip. But this time, Emily was unshaken. She presented her documentation, showing clearly that Karen had violated the law. The photographs, official papers, and logical arguments dismantled Karen's narrative piece by piece. The HOA members watched in silence as Emily methodically exposed the truth. Each slide of her presentation, each well-referenced legal citation chipped away at the arrogance Karen had relied upon. Emily could see the subtle signs, the tightening of shoulders, the avoidance of eye contact, the quickened pace of excuses. That revealed Karen's confidence was beginning to crumble. It was not immediate satisfaction, but a quiet vindication that fueled Emily's sense of justice. Emily's anger, now refined into determination, took on a new form. She was no longer simply mourning what was lost. She was actively reclaiming agency. She organized a neighborhood newsletter, telling the story of the oak tree, the destruction, and the HOA's disregard for law and fairness. The community's response surprised her. Neighbors expressed outrage, shared similar frustrations, and began to rally behind her. The anger that had once felt isolating transformed into collective momentum. By taking control of the narrative and exposing the HOA's lawbreaking, Emily realized that her fight was about more than a single tree. She was challenging a system that allowed unchecked authority to overrule personal rights and historical preservation. Her anger had become her compass, guiding her toward justice, accountability, and restoration. No longer merely reactive, she was proactive, assertive, and unstoppable. In those weeks, Emily felt a profound shift within herself. What had begun as shock, then hatred, had now matured into focused energy. Every meeting, every email, every photograph presented in public forums strengthened her resolve. Her anger was no longer chaotic or destructive. It was purposeful, deliberate, and precise. She was no longer a victim. She was a force demanding fairness, clarity, and respect for the law. And with every step, Emily could feel the tide turning as the oak tree's story became a symbol of justice, accountability, and the triumph of determination over arrogance. The courtroom was quiet, the tension palpable as the judge read the verdict. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of anticipation and the remnants of frustration from months of battle. When the words finally came, clear and decisive, she felt an overwhelming wave of relief and triumph. The HOA had been found in violation of the law, ordered to compensate her for the damage and to restore the oak tree to its former glory. Karen, whose arrogance had once seemed untouchable, was fined for overstepping her authority and ignoring legal boundaries. Emily's shock, anger, and hatred had culminated in a tangible victory, a testament to persistence and moral clarity. Standing outside the courthouse, Emily breathed deeply, savoring the sunlight and the cool breeze. For years, that massive oak had been more than just a tree. It had been a silent witness to birthdays, anniversaries, and countless quiet moments of reflection. Now, knowing that it would live on, protected and restored, she felt an indescribable satisfaction. The months of gathering evidence, meeting with lawyers, and facing the intimidating gaze of the HOA had been grueling, but every challenge had strengthened her resolve. Each small victory along the way, a supportive neighbor, a well-timed piece of legal advice, a public acknowledgement of the injustice, now felt amplified, converging into this final moment of validation.
When Emily returned home a few weeks later, the landscape had begun to transform. Young saplings were planted where the old branches had been cut, carefully nurtured to grow into the strong, beautiful tree that had once graced her backyard. She knelt beside one of the new oaks, brushing her hand along the tender leaves, and felt a connection that went beyond the physical. This tree, like her struggle, symbolized resilience, patience, and the quiet yet powerful force of standing up for what is right. Emily's neighbors, once passive observers, had watched the process unfold with growing admiration. The story of the oak tree and of her unwavering fight against the HOA's reckless authority spread throughout the community. They began to realize that their own voices mattered, that laws and ethical boundaries existed to protect not just property, but the sense of fairness and shared respect within a neighborhood. Emily, once a solitary figure battling injustice, had become a quiet beacon of inspiration, someone who had turned personal outrage into communal empowerment. Satisfaction for Emily was not just about the legal victory or the restored oak. It was about reclaiming dignity and proving that even small acts of courage could lead to significant change. She walked through her yard, surveying the meticulous restoration and the new saplings, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. The battle had been long, but the result reaffirmed her belief in justice, accountability, and the importance of standing firm in the face of arrogance. As the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting golden light through the young leaves, Emily realized the broader lesson. Power unchecked can never crush life, nature, or integrity if someone refuses to stay silent. Shock, anger, and hatred had transformed into joy, inspiration, and hope. Each morning that she would now spend beneath the sprawling branches of the new oak would be a quiet celebration, a reminder that persistence and courage can restore what was once lost, and that even one determined individual can inspire a community to uphold fairness and respect. In that moment, Emily felt an inner peace she hadn't known since the ordeal began. The court's decision, the restoration of the tree, and the collective awareness she had sparked in her neighbors all coalesced into a sense of completeness. She knew the journey had tested her patience, her faith, and her resolve, but the outcome reaffirmed her belief that justice could prevail, not by luck, but through persistence, courage, and refusing to remain silent when faced with injustice. The oak tree, now thriving once again, stood as a living monument to that truth.